She had never been to a party like this before. The kind of party where chandeliers sparkled over perfectly polished floors, and laughter floated through rooms filled with people in suits and evening dresses. The invitations alone were the kind that made ordinary people stare with disbelief. She was invited not because she was famous, not because she had a title, but because she worked quietly behind the scenes and had done her job well. Yet, she felt nervous. She had always lived a life that moved at its own quiet pace, surrounded by people who appreciated her work in the background. Tonight, she was stepping into a world that seemed completely different from the one she knew. The moment she walked through the doors, she felt eyes on her. Some looked curious, others indifferent, and a few clearly skeptical. She could hear small murmurs, soft laughter that carried just enough for her to catch snippets of it. Some guests whispered to each other, likely thinking, "Who invited her?" Or, "Does she really belong here?" Despite the murmurs, she held her head high. She was not a woman to let the opinions of strangers shake her. She wore a simple but elegant dress, something that made her feel comfortable while still showing respect for the occasion. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't loud, but it was her. The room was alive with conversation. People moved in small clusters, discussing deals, achievements, and upcoming projects. The air smelled faintly of perfume, expensive cologne, and a hint of something floral from the centerpieces scattered across the room. She walked slowly, taking it all in, trying not to get lost in the sea of unfamiliar faces. The clinking of glasses and the soft hum of chatter filled the air. Each step she took made her more aware of the differences between her life and the lives of these people. It was not a place she had grown up in, not a place she had imagined for herself, but somehow, being here felt like a challenge she wanted to accept. She was guided toward a small corner, away from the center of attention. From here, she could observe the room without feeling overwhelmed. She noticed the CEO at the other end, chatting with several executives. Everyone seemed polished, practiced, and confident. The conversations flowed easily, the laughter seemed rehearsed, and the handshakes were firm and deliberate. She couldn't help but feel a pang of insecurity. These were people who had been groomed for these spaces all their lives, and here she was, stepping in with only her quiet confidence and her skills. It was a test, and she felt the weight of it. Some guests approached her out of curiosity. They asked where she worked, what she did, and how she knew the host. Her answers were straightforward and honest. She did not try to embellish or impress. She simply shared her story. Some smiled politely, nodding, and then moved on. Others raised their eyebrows, their expressions saying, "That's all?" Or, "I expected more." She felt the sting, but she did not let it show. She knew her worth even if the room did not. A few moments later, she found herself near a grand piano in the corner of the room. It was a beautiful instrument, polished to a shine, and inviting as if it waited for someone to bring it to life. She could see the guests occasionally glancing at it, but no one seemed inclined to play. It was as if they assumed that only a select few could touch it. She felt a spark of something familiar, the kind of spark that told her she belonged here not because of status, but because of what she could give. She moved closer, letting her fingers brush lightly over the keys. The touch brought back memories of quiet evenings spent practicing, of melodies that filled small rooms with warmth, and of the joy she found in music. Music had always been her sanctuary, her way of expressing things words could not. Here, in this grand, intimidating space, it felt like an anchor, something that could center her amidst the chaos of wealth and expectation. As she stood there, a group of guests passed by and exchanged whispers. She caught fragments. "Who is she? Does she really work here? I didn't think someone like her would be invited." Their voices carried just enough for her to hear, and she felt the familiar weight of underestimation. People had a way of sizing her up in seconds, judging her by what they saw on the surface. Most of the time they were wrong. They did not know what she could do, the depth of her abilities, or the quiet strength that had carried her through challenges in her life. Tonight, she realized, would be no different. But she was ready. Despite the whispers, she remained calm. She did not feel the need to prove herself immediately, but she also knew that if she did, the moment would come naturally. She observed the room, noticed who seemed genuine, who was merely polite, and who dismissed her entirely. Each observation added to her understanding of this world she had stepped into, a world that often measured people by appearance and status rather than substance. She had learned long ago that patience and quiet confidence often spoke louder than words, and she planned to use that to her advantage. She caught sight of a few people laughing a little too loudly at inside jokes, perhaps to make themselves feel superior. She recognized the pattern. She had seen it many times before in different settings. People often underestimated those who did not seek attention, assuming they lacked talent or ambition. She smiled to herself, remembering the countless times she had surprised others with her skills and determination. Tonight might just be another one of those times. As the evening progressed, she noticed a subtle change in the room's energy. The conversations continued, but there was a slight undercurrent of curiosity directed toward her. Some people who had dismissed her began to glance her way more often. Perhaps it was her calm demeanor, the way she carried herself, or maybe they sensed that she was not just another guest meant to fill the room. Whatever it was, she felt the shift and welcomed it. She continued to explore the space, making small talk with those who approached her. Her conversation was genuine, thoughtful, and unpretentious. She listened more than she spoke, asking questions that showed interest and empathy rather than trying to impress. Slowly, she began to notice a few nods of respect, subtle acknowledgments that she was more than just a quiet observer. Even in a room full of people used to being noticed, her presence started to matter. Eventually, she returned to the piano. She could feel it calling to her, as if the instrument itself understood that she had something to offer. The room seemed to quiet slightly whenever she approached it, though she did not play yet. She simply stood there, letting her fingers hover over the keys, feeling the texture, imagining the melodies that might flow. It was a moment of anticipation, a silent promise to herself that she would not be underestimated tonight. As she looked around the room one last time before taking her first note, she noticed the expressions of the guests. Some still doubted, some remained indifferent, but others seemed intrigued, sensing that something unexpected was about to happen. She drew a deep breath, feeling a mix of nervousness and excitement. This was her world now, in this moment, and she intended to make it count. She did not need validation from anyone. The music she carried inside her was enough to define her. The first part of the evening ended with her standing near the piano, unnoticed by most, yet fully aware of the possibilities ahead. The glances, the whispers, the quiet skepticism. It all set the stage. She knew the real story was about to begin, one that would unfold not through conversation or appearances, but through the language she had known all her life, the music that lived in her hands and heart. She smiled softly, ready for what was coming, knowing that this was her chance to show the room, and perhaps herself, that underestimation was a mistake she was about to correct. The evening moved on, and the party seemed to grow louder, brighter, and even more chaotic. People mingled in clusters, drinks in hand, voices raised over the music playing softly in the background. The protagonist remained near the piano, observing the room, listening, and noting the behavior of the guests. Her quiet patience allowed her to see the subtle hierarchies at play, the alliances formed in the glances and gestures that others might have missed. She noticed who commanded attention effortlessly, who tried too hard to be noticed, and who watched silently like she did, unnoticed but aware. The CEO walked past her, laughing at a joke someone whispered in his ear, his eyes scanning the room for someone who might entertain or impress him. He paused near the piano, giving her a quick, curious glance, then moved on. The moment was brief, almost dismissive, but it lingered in her mind. She realized that he, like many others, had probably underestimated her already, just as she expected. There was a quiet thrill in knowing that she had the chance to prove them wrong in a way they would not forget. A small group of guests approached the piano, one of them joking about the instrument. "Anyone here brave enough to play?" one of them asked with a laugh that made it clear they didn't expect an answer. The group chuckled, sipping their champagne and exchanging amused glances. Their laughter was polite, but the undertone of condescension was clear. They assumed that no one of her background would dare, that music, like many other things in that room, was a privilege reserved for the elite or the highly trained professionals. She felt a flutter of nerves but also a deep, steady resolve. This was her moment, and she could feel it. She stepped forward slightly, letting her presence be known, and said softly, almost casually, "I can play." There was a brief pause. Some guests looked at her, eyebrows raised. A few whispered among themselves, their amusement mixing with curiosity. One person smirked, muttering, "Well, that should be interesting." She ignored the skepticism. Her hands brushed the keys lightly, feeling the familiar texture and weight beneath her fingers. It was as if the piano recognized her touch and welcomed it. The room seemed to quiet, though no one intentionally tried to stop their conversations. It was the kind of silence that happens when something unexpected enters the scene, and people can't help but pay attention. She took a deep breath, positioning herself comfortably on the bench. Her posture was calm, but inside, her heart beat with anticipation. She began to play softly at first, almost like testing the waters, her fingers moving gracefully across the keys. The sound was delicate, precise, and beautiful. Some of the guests turned their heads, curiosity piqued. A few exchanged surprised glances, and she could feel the shift in energy around her. As she continued, her music grew richer and more expressive. Each note carried emotion, weaving a tapestry that filled the room in a way words never could. The laughter and chatter faded to a background hum, replaced by the sound of her skill and passion. People stopped moving, paused mid-conversation, and listened. The group that had joked moments before now watched with a mix of astonishment and respect. The skeptics' expressions changed from amusement to disbelief. They had underestimated her, and the reality of her talent was impossible to ignore. Her fingers danced across the keys, playing a melody that seemed to resonate with the soul of the room. Guests who had previously ignored her now found themselves drawn to the piano. Some whispered to each other, incredulous that someone so quietly confident could command such attention. The CEO returned, standing nearby and watching, genuinely intrigued. He had seen many people perform, but there was something unique about her presence, the authenticity that radiated from both her demeanor and her music. He leaned slightly forward, eyes focused, silently acknowledging that he had misjudged her. She felt the room shift under her influence. Music had a way of breaking down barriers that words often failed to touch. The air seemed lighter, more open, as if the melody had pulled the guests into a shared moment of wonder. People forgot for a while their titles, their status, and their judgments. They were simply listeners, captivated by the sound that came effortlessly from someone they had underestimated. The protagonist felt a quiet satisfaction, not from revenge or proving them wrong, but from the pure joy of sharing her gift and seeing its effect. As she played, she noticed subtle signs of change among the guests. The group that had been amused before now nodded in appreciation, their whispers turning into quiet comments of admiration. Others approached her, complimenting her skill, some sheepishly, some with genuine awe. She acknowledged them with a gentle smile, not flaunting her ability, but letting the music speak for itself. Her calm confidence and authenticity began to win over hearts and minds alike. The room was no longer divided by social assumptions. It was united in appreciation for the talent before them. The music carried a story, one that reflected her journey, her quiet determination, and the countless hours of practice and perseverance she had invested. She poured a part of herself into each note, creating a bridge between her world and theirs. Guests who had dismissed her as ordinary now saw her in a new light. The performance was more than just a display of skill. It was a statement, a gentle but undeniable assertion of her worth. It showed that talent and authenticity could transcend social boundaries, that people should not be underestimated based on appearances alone. By the time she finished, a hush fell over the room. For a brief moment, no one spoke, no one moved. The effect of her performance lingered in the air, a powerful reminder of what had been possible when she was allowed to shine. Then, slowly, the room erupted into applause. People clapped, some cheerfully, some with a newfound respect, all acknowledging her presence and her skill. The CEO himself approached, extending a hand with a warm smile, offering sincere praise. His eyes met hers, and for the first time, she felt that the room saw her, truly saw her, for who she was and what she could do. The evening continued, but the dynamics had shifted. Guests who had ignored her or looked down upon her now sought her out, eager to engage, to learn more about her story. She handled the attention with grace, never letting arrogance creep in, letting her calm demeanor and genuine kindness shine as brightly as her talent. The piano had been her bridge, her way of introducing herself to a world that had dismissed her too quickly. She had turned skepticism into admiration without needing to speak a single boastful word. As the night progressed, she realized that this experience was more than a single performance. It was a lesson, a reminder that judgment based on appearances is often flawed, and that confidence, patience, and authenticity can have a powerful impact. She had walked into the party underestimated, observed, and measured by others. She would leave it as someone who had claimed her space, who had shared her gift, and who had shown that underestimation was a mistake. The music lingered in her mind even after the applause faded. She knew that this moment would stay with her, a quiet reminder of her strength and resilience. She had stepped into a world that had seemed intimidating, faced the doubts of others, and emerged with respect and recognition, not through force or confrontation, but through the simple, beautiful language of her talent. And in that, she found a quiet, profound satisfaction that no amount of social status or approval could ever provide. The room had shifted after her first few notes. What had been polite curiosity and soft laughter now turned into quiet anticipation. Guests who had been busy in their own conversations found themselves drawn toward the piano, almost involuntarily. Even those who had dismissed her earlier were now leaning in, eyes fixed on the subtle, confident movements of her hands across the keys. The music she played was more than just notes. It carried emotion, subtle shifts in tone, and a kind of storytelling that drew listeners into her world. She began to play a melody that was soft at first, almost tentative, as if testing the room, feeling the way the audience would respond. But as she played, confidence grew with each note. The soft whispers and polite coughs faded. The room itself seemed to take a deep breath, leaning into the music, listening, absorbing every touch of the keys. Some guests shifted in their chairs, unable to resist the pull of her skill. She noticed a few mouths slightly open, expressions of surprise and admiration that replaced the skepticism from earlier. With each passing moment, her fingers danced across the keys with a grace that seemed effortless. The music told a story of quiet determination, of patience, of long hours spent learning and perfecting. Guests who had previously underestimated her began to realize the depth of her talent. Their polite smiles were replaced by genuine expressions of awe. She could see it in their eyes, the shift from doubt to admiration. They had expected nothing from her, and now they were experiencing the extraordinary. A small cluster of influential guests, who had been talking among themselves moments before, now moved closer. Their laughter had vanished, replaced by attentive silence. They whispered to one another, their heads tilting as they tried to comprehend the skill displayed in front of them. She could feel the energy of the room changing. Music had a way of leveling hierarchies, dissolving judgments. People forgot about titles, wealth, and preconceptions. For this moment, all that mattered was the music and the person who could coax it from the piano with such passion and precision. The CEO returned to her side, standing quietly at first. His earlier glance had been curious, but now it was focused and intent. He watched the way her hands moved, the expressions on her face, and the subtle control she had over the dynamics and tempo of the piece. He leaned slightly closer, intrigued by her ability to command attention without words. In this room, where words and appearances often dominated, she spoke through music, and her voice was undeniable. Her performance shifted from soft and tentative to a richer, more complex melody. Each phrase she played told a story. Each chord carried emotion. The room responded. Guests who had been distracted now stood silently, their eyes glued to her hands, their faces reflecting amazement. Even the skeptics, those who had whispered that she was just a quiet guest who could not impress anyone, now had to confront the truth. She was extraordinary, and there was no denying it. As she continued, she noticed subtle interactions in the crowd. A few people exchanged glances, nodding to each other with silent acknowledgement of the talent before them. Others leaned in, listening intently, appreciating the skill and expression. The energy in the room had shifted completely. Where there had once been underestimation and doubt, now there was curiosity, respect, and admiration. She had not said a word, yet she had captured the attention and hearts of everyone present. The melody began to flow more freely, with crescendos that brought gasps from a few guests and gentle, quiet moments that drew listeners closer. She felt herself becoming one with the piano, each note a conversation with the room itself. Her earlier nerves had faded, replaced by a calm and powerful focus. This was her moment, and she embraced it fully. She did not perform to impress or to win approval. She performed because the music was part of her, and now it was reaching out and touching the people around her. Guests who had been part of the dismissive whispers earlier now approached her after each segment of the melody, offering words of praise. Some were cautious, unsure how to respond at first, while others were openly amazed, asking questions about her background and training. She smiled politely, answering briefly but genuinely, never letting the attention make her boastful. Her calm demeanor only enhanced the effect of her performance, showing that true talent did not need to shout to be noticed. The room had become alive in a way it had not been when the evening began. Music had the power to alter atmosphere, to create a shared experience, and she had done that effortlessly. People moved closer to hear better, leaning in, their faces lit with admiration. The CEO, who had once passed her with a curious glance, now stood fully engaged, nodding appreciatively at the flow and emotion of the piece. His attention was genuine, and he seemed almost captivated by her ability to command the room through her playing. The melody shifted once more, moving from gentle, flowing passages to stronger, more expressive chords that carried intensity and emotion. The change in tempo and dynamics drew the audience further into the story she was telling. There were moments of quiet reflection, where even the most talkative guests seemed to pause, absorbed in the atmosphere she had created. It was no longer just a party. It was an experience, a performance that left an imprint on everyone present. Some guests, previously absorbed in conversation and self-importance, now sat silently, their expressions a mixture of awe and surprise. They had underestimated her, and that underestimation was slowly dissolving into respect and recognition. She had turned the room around with nothing but her skill, her presence, and the authenticity she brought to the music. This was more than just performance. It was a revelation, a reminder that talent and quiet confidence could command attention in the most unlikely places. As the piece reached its climax, the room seemed to hold its collective breath. The crescendo of sound was powerful but controlled, a testament to her mastery and emotional connection to the music. Guests leaned in, eyes wide, mouths slightly open, experiencing the impact of a talent that they had dismissed too quickly. Even those who had been openly skeptical moments before were now witnessing the undeniable skill and poise she brought to the piano. They had been wrong to underestimate her, and they knew it. When the final note faded into silence, the effect lingered. It was not just the sound that remained, but the energy, the awe, the shift in perception. People around the piano exchanged glances, nodding slowly, some murmuring words of appreciation and disbelief. The CEO, standing nearby, broke the silence with a warm, genuine smile, approaching her to offer praise. His demeanor was one of sincere admiration, and his words carried weight. She had earned recognition not through pretense or ambition, but through the pure expression of her talent. The applause began softly, hesitant at first, and then grew into genuine appreciation. Hands clapped, people smiled. Some even stood to express their admiration more clearly. The atmosphere of the party had transformed. Where there had been casual conversation, polite laughter, and quiet underestimation, Now there was respect, acknowledgement, and a shared sense of awe. She had done more than play a piece on the piano. She had captured the attention and hearts of those around her. As she rested her hands, the applause continued, and she allowed herself a small, humble smile. She had stepped into the party underestimated, observed, and even doubted. Now, she had emerged as someone who had shown her worth without needing to compete or shout. Her music had spoken for her, revealing a depth and talent that few had anticipated. She realized that the real power lay in being authentic, in letting her abilities shine quietly but unmistakably. The guests began to approach her, some with genuine admiration, others with curiosity about her story and background. She answered their questions calmly, never boasting, letting her actions speak louder than words. The piano had been her bridge, connecting her to a world that had dismissed her too quickly. Through music, she had changed perceptions, turning doubt into recognition and underestimation into respect. By the end of her performance, the dynamics of the party had shifted entirely. She had taken a space where she was considered an outsider and made it hers, not by force or assertion, but by being herself and allowing her talent to shine. People who had dismissed her were now allies in admiration, drawn to her authenticity and skill. She felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that she had achieved something far greater than applause. She had changed minds and opened hearts through the power of her music. As the room continued its activities, she stepped back from the piano, feeling a sense of calm and accomplishment. She had entered the evening underestimated, faced skepticism, and emerged with respect and recognition. The experience was a reminder that talent, patience, and authenticity could overcome even the strongest preconceptions. The night was far from over, but she had already proven something essential. Underestimation could be turned into opportunity, and quiet confidence could speak louder than words. The final note of her performance hung in the air, delicate and lingering, as if reluctant to leave. The room was silent for a moment, caught in the spell of what they had just witnessed. Then, slowly, applause began to ripple through the crowd. At first it was quiet, tentative, but it grew, swelling into a wave of genuine appreciation that filled the entire room. The guests who had underestimated her earlier now looked at her with a mix of awe and respect. It was clear to everyone that she had achieved something remarkable without saying a single boastful word. The CEO stepped forward, his expression transformed from curiosity to genuine admiration. He extended a hand, and when she shook it, she could feel the sincerity behind his words of praise. He asked about her musical journey, her training, and how she had developed such skill. She answered honestly and humbly, sharing brief stories of practice, patience, and the love for music that had guided her. The CEO listened intently, clearly impressed not only by her talent but also by her humility and the quiet confidence that radiated from her. Guests who had been skeptical moments before now gathered closer, eager to learn more about her. Some asked about her life outside work, while others inquired about her musical experiences. She responded with warmth and sincerity, never boasting, letting her authenticity shine through every word. It was a subtle power, one that drew people to her and made them want to know her better. The applause had opened the door, but it was her demeanor that kept them engaged and interested. The energy in the room had shifted completely. What had once been a space dominated by social hierarchy, casual judgment, and subtle dismissiveness was now united by admiration for someone who had defied expectations. People who had previously ignored her now sought conversation, eager to connect and understand her story. The transformation was striking, and she felt a quiet satisfaction in seeing it unfold. She had entered the room underestimated, and she had turned that underestimation into recognition and respect. She walked around, acknowledging compliments and engaging in polite conversation. The guests listened attentively, genuinely interested in her experiences and insights. She noticed subtle nods and smiles that indicated respect had replaced doubt. The CEO introduced her to others in the room, his praise acting as a bridge that connected her to influential figures she had never interacted with before. She realized that her music had not only captivated the audience, but had also opened doors that would have remained closed otherwise. Throughout the evening, she maintained her calm and composed demeanor. Despite the attention and praise, she remained grounded, focusing on genuine interactions rather than seeking validation. It was a delicate balance, and she managed it with ease. Her presence became a source of inspiration for others, demonstrating that true talent combined with humility and authenticity could command attention and admiration far beyond what appearances might suggest. She noticed small moments of transformation among the guests. People who had laughed dismissively at her presence earlier were now listening intently to her words, nodding in agreement, and showing genuine curiosity. Some whispered to one another, sharing their amazement at her skill and the quiet confidence she displayed. It was evident that she had left a lasting impression, one that would be remembered long after the party ended. The CEO took a moment to speak publicly, acknowledging the exceptional performance she had given. He praised her talent, her dedication, and the grace with which she had handled the situation. The room responded with applause once again, and she felt a deep sense of accomplishment. This was more than recognition. It was validation of her hard work, her persistence, and the quiet strength that had guided her throughout her life. As the evening continued, she engaged in deeper conversations with guests who had previously overlooked her. They were genuinely interested in her perspective, seeking advice and insights. She listened attentively, offering thoughtful responses without dominating the conversation. Her ability to connect through both music and conversation created an atmosphere of mutual respect. The walls of preconception had been broken, replaced by curiosity, admiration, and genuine engagement. In the quiet moments, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The nervousness she had felt upon entering the party had transformed into confidence and fulfillment. She realized that underestimation often comes from superficial judgments, and that true recognition is earned through authenticity, skill, and the courage to embrace opportunities fully. Music had been her medium, but her character and composure had amplified its impact. By the end of the night, she had established herself not merely as a performer but as a person of substance and grace. Guests sought her out, wanting to continue conversations, exchange ideas, and build connections. She felt a quiet pride in knowing that she had turned an evening that began with doubt and skepticism into one marked by admiration and genuine engagement. Her talent had been the key, but her authenticity had been the lock that allowed it to open doors and hearts. The party gradually began to wind down, but her presence continued to draw attention. Even as the crowd thinned, guests lingered, expressing appreciation and sharing their experiences. She moved gracefully through these interactions, acknowledging each gesture with warmth and sincerity. It was clear that the evening had changed perceptions, leaving a lasting impression not only of her musical skill, but also of her character. As she finally took a moment for herself, she returned to the piano. It had been the center of her triumph, the instrument through which she had communicated her talent and authenticity. She placed her hands lightly on the keys, not to perform again, but to feel the connection that had carried her through the evening. The piano had been her voice when words alone were insufficient, and she felt gratitude for the opportunity it had provided. She looked around at the guests who remained, some still engaged in conversation, others reflecting quietly on what they had experienced. The room had transformed from one of social hierarchies and subtle dismissiveness to a space where respect, admiration, and genuine connection prevailed. She had played a part in that transformation, not through ambition or assertion, but through the simple act of sharing her gift with authenticity and grace. The CEO approached once more, offering a few final words of praise and expressing interest in future collaborations. She accepted graciously, recognizing the potential opportunities that had opened as a result of her performance. It was a reminder that talent, when combined with humility and courage, could create pathways previously unimagined. She had not sought recognition, but it had found her through her dedication and authenticity. As the party came to a close, she reflected on the journey of the evening. She had been underestimated, dismissed, and overlooked, but she had risen above it through skill, patience, and genuine presence. The experience reinforced her belief in the power of authenticity and the impact of quietly confident talent. She left the party not only recognized and respected but also inspired by the realization that underestimation is often an opportunity waiting to be claimed. The night had been a turning point, a moment where her abilities and character had been fully acknowledged. She walked away from the piano with a sense of fulfillment, knowing that she had not only entertained but also transformed the room. Her story was one of quiet resilience, demonstrating that true talent and authenticity could overcome doubt and skepticism, leaving a lasting impression that words alone could never achieve. The party had slowly begun to wind down, but she remained calm and composed, moving through the room with quiet confidence. The evening had been transformative, not just for the guests who had underestimated her, but for herself as well. She had stepped into a world that felt distant, intimidating, and full of judgment, and yet she had emerged with recognition and respect. It was a night that would stay with her, a night where her talent and authenticity had spoken louder than any words or titles could. She walked back to the piano one last time, feeling the familiar texture of the keys beneath her fingers. She did not play, but simply rested her hands lightly, remembering the journey of the evening. The piano had been more than an instrument. It had been a bridge, a way to communicate her skill, patience, and quiet strength to a room full of people who had underestimated her. Every note she had played had been a statement, a gentle yet undeniable assertion that talent and authenticity could command attention and respect. Guests continued to approach her, some to offer final compliments, others to ask questions about her background and journey. She responded with warmth and humility, never boasting, letting her story and her music speak for themselves. Each interaction was genuine, a reflection of her character and the quiet confidence that had carried her through the evening. People listened, engaged, and connected, recognizing the depth of her abilities and the authenticity she brought to every conversation. The CEO approached her once more, this time with a more personal acknowledgement. He praised her not only for her performance but for the way she carried herself throughout the evening. Her humility, grace, and talent had made an impression that went beyond music. He suggested that they stay in touch and explore potential opportunities, and she accepted with a genuine smile. The acknowledgement felt meaningful, not because of status or ambition, but because it recognized her for who she truly was. She reflected on how the night had started, remembering the skeptical glances, the whispered comments, and the subtle dismissiveness of some guests. They had underestimated her, assuming that her quiet presence meant a lack of skill or ambition. Yet, through her performance and authenticity, she had transformed those perceptions completely. The experience reinforced the lesson she had always believed in. Appearances can be deceiving, and true talent often shines quietly, waiting for the right moment to be recognized. As she moved through the remaining guests, she noticed small interactions that confirmed the impact of her presence. People who had initially ignored her now sought her perspective, valuing her thoughts and insights. Others expressed admiration for her ability to command attention without arrogance, to share her gift in a way that inspired and captivated. She realized that recognition was not just about the applause or the praise but about the subtle, lasting impression she left on others. The evening had shown her that confidence does not need to be loud to be effective. She had been underestimated because she did not shout for attention, because she did not flaunt her skills or social connections. Yet, her quiet confidence, combined with talent and authenticity, had created a far more powerful impression than any display of arrogance could have. She understood now that underestimation could be a hidden advantage, a chance to surprise and inspire when the moment was right. As the last guests prepared to leave, she felt a sense of fulfillment. The night had been a turning point, a moment where her abilities and character had been fully acknowledged. She had entered the party unsure of how she would be received, and she left it having transformed the room, having shifted perceptions, and having shown that true talent and grace are impossible to ignore. Her music had spoken, her authenticity had resonated, and her quiet strength had commanded respect. In the final moments, she took a deep breath, feeling gratitude for the opportunity and the experience. She realized that the evening was not just about recognition or admiration. It was about embracing her own worth and the power of her abilities. The applause, the praise, and the new connections were meaningful, but the true reward was the affirmation of her own confidence. The realization that she could face skepticism and emerge stronger, more respected, and more confident than before. Walking out of the grand venue, she felt a sense of closure and accomplishment. The city lights outside reflected in her eyes, and the cool night air was refreshing. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the long hours of practice, the dedication to her craft, and the quiet determination that had guided her every step. She knew that the evening had changed not just the perceptions of others, but her own understanding of what she was capable of. The experience had left an indelible mark on her. She had proven to herself that talent, authenticity, and quiet confidence could break through doubt and skepticism. She had learned that underestimation by others is not a limitation but an opportunity to reveal hidden strength. The evening had been a story of transformation, both for those who had underestimated her and for herself. She had stepped into a space where she was seen as ordinary and left it as someone whose presence, skill, and character could not be ignored. She reflected on the subtle lessons of the night. Patience, humility, and authenticity were powerful tools, often overlooked in a world that values appearances and status. She had used them naturally, without force, and the result had been undeniable. Recognition had come not from arrogance, not from seeking approval, but from being herself and letting her abilities shine through action rather than words. It was a lesson she would carry with her, not just in social gatherings but in all aspects of life. As she made her way home, she thought about the connections she had made and the impressions she had left. The night had been transformative, a reminder that talent and character are often the most lasting impressions one can leave. She knew that this experience would influence her future, opening doors and creating opportunities she had never imagined. The respect she had earned was a reflection of her authenticity and skill, a testament to the power of quiet confidence and dedication. Arriving home, she placed her bag down and reflected on the evening once more. The memory of the applause, the smiles, and the genuine admiration lingered. She thought about the skeptics, the whispers, and the doubts she had faced, and she smiled. They had underestimated her, but she had turned that underestimation into a defining moment of achievement. The piano, her talent, and her quiet confidence had changed perceptions, and she felt a deep sense of satisfaction and fulfillment. She realized that the story of the evening was not just about one performance, one party, or one audience. It was about the broader truth that authenticity, skill, and perseverance can overcome doubt and skepticism. It was about showing the world, and more importantly herself, that underestimation is not a limitation but an opportunity. She had embraced that opportunity fully, and the result was a night that would remain in her memory as a turning point, a moment of recognition, and a demonstration of the power of talent and authenticity.